The Books of the Bible, narrated by Marcus Anderson. Moses was the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, of which Genesis is the first. It was written between 1446 and 1406 BC. Genesis takes its name from the Greek word meaning origin or beginning. The book starts with the creation of the universe and the creation of man and woman. It describes the fall of man and woman into sin and establishes God as the one true sovereign over all his creation. Genesis includes the accounts of Noah and the flood, the origin of the nations, the establishment of the Israelites as God's chosen people, and the accounts of the lives of such people as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The first book tells us of the creation and the fall from chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 5, verse 32. The second book tells us of Noah and his descendants from chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 11, verse 26. The third book tells us of Abram, who later became Abraham and his descendants, from chapter 11, verse 27, through chapter 25, verse 18. The fourth book tells us of Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, from chapter 25, verse 19, through chapter 36, verse 43. And the fifth book tells us of Joseph, from chapter 37, verse 1, through chapter 50, verse 26. The Books of the Bible, narrated by Marcus Anderson. The Book of Ruth. Samuel is traditionally viewed as the author of Ruth, which was written in or about 1000 BC. This book is the tender story of an embittered woman, Naomi, a kind, loving daughter-in-law, Ruth, and a man called Boaz. Despite Naomi's bitterness, Ruth, with the help of Boaz, is able to bring a sense of fullness into Naomi's life. This book is a prime example of Christian love in action and its powerful effects on people. The first part of the book discusses the backgrounds of Naomi and Ruth in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 1, verse 22. The second part of the book discusses Ruth and Boaz from chapter 2, verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 17. And the third part of the book discusses the partial lineage of Boaz and Ruth's son from chapter 4, verse 18 through chapter 4, verse 22. The Books of the Bible, narrated by Marcus Anderson. 1 Samuel. Samuel wrote the majority of this book in or about 1120 BC. Samuel is the last of the judges of Israel and is the bridge between the times of the judges and the monarchy of Israel. Samuel is a prophet of God who warns the Israelites about the dangers of a king, but is unable to persuade them of those dangers. He lives during the reign of the first king, Saul, and the rise of David as king of Israel. The story of David and Goliath is found in chapter 17. The first part of the book discusses Samuel and his reign as judge in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 22. The second part of the book discusses Saul as king of Israel in chapter 9, verse 1 through chapter 15, verse 35. The third part of the book discusses the rise of David in chapter 16, verse 1 through chapter 17, verse 58. And the fourth part of the book discusses the battle for control between Saul and David in chapter 18, verse 1 through chapter 31, verse 13. The Books of the Bible by Marcus Anderson. Judges. Samuel wrote the book of Judges around 1000 BC. The book of Judges covers approximately 300 years from the death of Joshua until the rise of the monarchy in Israel. During this tumultuous time, several leaders, judges, are raised up to govern the people. Some of these men and women are heroic in their efforts, while others rule over a people straying far from God. The two best characters in the book are Gideon in chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 35, and Samson. Samson and his affair with Delilah is the best known story in chapter 16, verse 1 through chapter 16, verse 31. The first part of the book discusses Israel following the death of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 6. The second part of the book discusses Israel under the judges, in chapter 3, verse 7 through chapter 16, verse 31. And the third part of the book discusses the failings during the period of the judges, in chapter 17, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 25. The books of the Bible, narrated by Marcus Anderson. The book of Joshua. The book of Joshua was written by him, except the account of his death in chapter 24. The date of writing could be as early as 1400 BC or as late as 1200 BC. In this book, the Israelites crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, with Joshua now the heir to Moses' leadership. There are two distinct parts to the book. The first describes the conquest of Canaan. The second gives explicit details of the dividing of the land among the tribes. Probably the most recognized scriptures in the book are those describing the story of Joshua and the Israelites' conquest of the city of Jericho in chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 27. The first part of the book discusses entering the land of Canaan and conquering it in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 24. The second part of the book discusses dividing the land in chapter 13, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 45. And the third part of the book discusses Joshua's farewell in chapter 22, verse 1 through chapter 24, verse 33. The books of the Bible, narrated by Marcus Anderson. The book of Joshua. The book of Joshua was written by him, except the account of his death in chapter 24. The date of writing could be as early as 1400 BC or as late as 1200 BC. In this book, the Israelites crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan with Joshua, now the heir to Moses' leadership. There are two distinct parts to the book. The first describes the conquest of Canaan, and the second gives explicit details of the dividing of the land among the tribes. Probably the most recognized scriptures in the book are those describing the story of Joshua and the Israelites' conquest of the city of Jericho, which can be found in chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 27. The first part of the book discusses the entering of the land of Canaan and conquering it, which can be found in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 24. The second part of the book discusses the dividing of the land, which can be found in chapter 13, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 45. And the third part of the book discusses Joshua's farewell, which can be found in chapter 22, verse 1 through chapter 24, verse 33.